I've had several people in the comments of previous videos asking me why I haven't covered Boots Ennis and when I'm going to start covering him. Well, I have made multiple videos where I've talked about Boots Ennis. I guess those people missed those videos. And I'm making a video here again about his latest win over Custio Clayton. This was on the undercard of Charlo Castano 2. Now, some people are going to complain that this video is late. Other people would have complained if I hadn't made the video at all. So it is what it is. You can please some people sometimes. You can't please all the people all the time. The main person I try to please is myself. Anyway, Ennis against Clayton. Now, Clayton, as the commentator said, was an Olympian. He was at the 2016 games in London. If we go over to his box rec here, you can see he's 34 years of age from Canada. And as an amateur, other than the Olympics, and interestingly, it doesn't mention his Olympics fights here, his Olympic fights on the main amateur page. You have to go to the bit that says Wiki, and then you see there that he reached the quarterfinals in the Olympics and lost to Fred Evans of the United Kingdom. So that is the guy who Jaron Ennis just fought. And again, this is the amateur career, at least amateur highlights. And there may be some names you can pick out there that you will recognize, such as Errol Spence, of course. Who else we got here? There was at least one or two other names. Stephen Donnelly, recognize that name. Tommy Langford. You guys remember Tommy Langford? I remember when he lost to that little guy from, was it Georgia? And that guy ended up getting locked up in America for some serious charges, like gangster-related charges. Let me see if I can find the guy here. Go to his pro box. And I'm getting way sidetracked here, people, but forgive me. This guy, Kurt Sadiz, I think that is the one I'm talking about. Indeed, him from Georgia. Yes. He got locked up on some serious charges. To my knowledge, he might still be inside, but I saw a recent report, news article that he'd been freed or was going to be freed. But then somebody posted a picture, apparently recent, of him still in prison. I guess in the prison gym or the mess hall or whatever. So I'm not sure what's going on with him. But anyway, enough of Tommy Langford. This guy, Clayton, is who Boots Ennis just fought. And at 34 years of age, you wonder where his career was really going. You look at his fights here. He did fight Lipinets a couple years back in 2020. That was a majority draw. Fought an ancient DeMarcus Corley back in 2019. And other than that, really hasn't fought anybody. So again, 34 years of age, has achieved nothing up until this point. And I say that respectfully. I'm talking on a world level, at least. So with guys like that, it's usually a case that they're not that good, especially in the welterweight division. This guy's based in Canada. It's not that difficult, at least prior to the past 2 years, to cross the border, go into the United States, have a fight, maybe base yourself in the United States. Lennox Lewis, of course, lived in Canada for many years. And when he turned professional, he was shopping for a professional deal in the US. He was looking for a trainer, a manager in the US. He used to go to the Kronk Gym in Detroit, which is not that far away from Ontario, where Lennox Lewis Lennox Lewis lived in a place called Kitchener, Ontario. And it wasn't that far away, a few hours drive between Ontario and where he lived in Ontario and Detroit, where the Kronk Gym was. And he used to go down there and spar and what have you. So point I'm making is, if Clayton was that good, he would have done something. He would have come onto the radar before now. The fact that he hasn't, I think, speaks volumes. Now, Jaron Ennis, as we know, a precocious talent, very fast, a hard hitter, switch hits seamlessly, and he appears to be the future of the welterweight division. If you're just going off the eye test, Jaron Ennis, for my money at least, is the most impressive looking welterweight since when? Mayweather. And when I say impressive, I'm talking in the physical aspect, in the sense that he's got tremendous hand speed, punching power. He's physically imposing. He's a big guy at 5'10", 74-inch reach. So it's not just one thing. Manny Pacquiao had faster hands than Ennis. Floyd Mayweather was probably sharper than Ennis. But when you put the entire package together as just a physical specimen, Ennis, for me, is the most impressive welterweight I've seen for many years, just as a physical specimen, in terms of what he can do, the combination of speed and power and switch hitting and athleticism, coordination, and so on. But that ability that he has, that natural ability, has yet to be tested against anyone that has elite level skills. And that's where we'll find out if Boots Ennis is the real deal or not. Guys like Clayton, and let me just briefly talk about the fight. Not much happened in the fight. Ennis was switching from southpaw to orthodox, was testing out a few punches, and then in the second round, he hit Clayton with an interesting shot. It was kind of a chopping right hand from a orthodox stance, which caught Clayton. It appeared to catch Clayton kind of behind the ear, and that was it. Clayton was apparently done. He couldn't regain his equilibrium, and the fight was over. So that's literally about it. If it was a more eventful fight and the opponent presented more of an obstacle, then I'd have more to talk about. But it was really a non-event. If you really wanted to, you could go through the fight with a fine-tooth comb and have a look at certain moves that Ennis makes that maybe somebody else could exploit. But that is a valid thing to do. At the same time, however, you have to bear in mind that fighters will often fight to the level of their opposition. They'll sometimes do things against an opponent like Clayton that they wouldn't do against, let's say, an Errol Spence or a Terence Crawford. An example of this would be Joe Joyce, when he was fighting the Berman Staverns of the world and all these guys. He was getting hit a lot. When he fought Daniel Dubois, a guy who he knew was much more of a live opponent than a Stavern and many of these other guys that he's been fighting, all of a sudden Joe Joyce developed a defense. He was hitting his opponent with a jab. He was mindful of not getting hit back himself. He was using his feet very effectively. You see, because he was fighting to the level of his opposition. When the opposition was good enough, Joyce upped his game and started being more defensively responsible. So it could be a similar situation with Ennis. Where you see issues with a fighter is where they make mistakes and get punished for the mistakes against lesser opposition. And especially if they get punished several times in a fight, that's when you look at it and say, okay, this may not be a level of opposition issue. This may be an actual technical issue or perhaps a mental issue. Anyway, Ennis dusted off this guy, Custio Clayton, called out Errol Spence, who was in the crowd. Spence just smiled, and you know the way Spence is, a very laid-back character. He's thinking about Terence Crawford. He's not thinking about Jaron Ennis right now. Some people have been calling for Ennis to fight Virgil Ortiz because they're the two guys who are jostling for position, battling for the spot as the heir apparent for the welterweight division, for the welterweight crown, the number one at 147. I don't think that's a realistic fight right now because of the fact that Ortiz is with Golden Boy, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, and Jaron Ennis is, well, he's not exactly with PBC, but he's with a promoter that works with PBC. This was on a PBC show. So, I mean, that little promoter he works with, I really forget the name here. Actually, his manager, I think, is Cameron Duncan, isn't it? And that's the guy that used to manage Brandon Rios, as well as a bunch of other people. So I believe he's managed by Cameron Duncan, or used to be. If he's working with some little promoter, assuming it isn't one of these little front promoters for Al Heyman, maybe he could work with DAZN and fight a Virgil Ortiz. But I have to imagine that Ortiz's people are looking to preserve him for the big names as well. They don't want to throw him in there against another up-and-coming contender. They'd rather put him in there. And see, this is where you really have to give credit to British boxing. Because in British boxing, it's quite common for young up-and-coming contenders who are both British to be matched against each other. In America, maybe it happens at a lower level, but when you're talking about prospects that are you're gonna assume are reaching world level at some stage, very rarely do they match them against each other. It's really a British thing where that happens, and I'm talking about the likes of, George Groves versus James DeGale and that kind of thing. Even Anthony Joshua, Dylan White. How many times do you see that in American boxing? You got two guys who are destined for world level, and they fight each other when they're still just prospects. See, sometimes British boxing fans are actually too hard on British boxing, and American boxing fans don't give British boxing enough credit. There's a reason why boxing is doing so well in Britain. It isn't just this idea that there's no other sports here, because a lot of Americans like to exaggerate this thing. They act like there's only football and then there's there's only football, what Americans call soccer, darts and snooker. What a load of rubbish. There's loads of sports in the United Kingdom. Football, of course, is massive. That's the biggest sport by far. Then you've got Formula One, which is a very big sport in the UK. And of course, across the world outside of the United States is really a bubble, because they don't realize how big certain sports are. In America, they have baseball, basketball, gridiron, and so on. All these sports, which are really not popular outside of America. So they tend to think that these are the major sports, and anything outside of these sports can't be popular because it's not popular in America. It's kind of a weird mindset they have because they live in this bubble. Not so much, it's getting better these days because of the internet and what have you. It's opened things up, so a lot of Americans are seeing things outside of their country. But for the longest while, certainly when I was growing up, America's so insular, the culture's so insular, that the ignorance they had for anything outside of America would astound you. Anyway, it's not an attack on America. Shout out to all the people, all my subscribers from America. But I'm just pointing certain things out. In the UK, there are other sports, rugby, there's motor racing, Formula One I've already mentioned, there's football, and then of course there is the darts and snooker and all that other stuff too, etc., etc. So the reason that boxing is as popular as it is in the United Kingdom, there's some history behind it because, of course, the Marcus of Queensberry rules and all that kind of stuff. But it's really about the fact that there are local rivalries that people care about. And these local rivalries fuel the boxing game in Britain. That's what it's all about. You can make more money oftentimes from a local rivalry fight in Britain than you can from taking that guy and sticking him in with certain world champions. You make more money from a local rivalry. But that local rivalry is cultivated and it's turned into an actual fight. Whereas in America, they don't really cultivate these local rivalries like that. Because I'm sure you have rivalries. I'm sure you have guys from the same city, the same state, whatever, who grew up, boxing with each other, the same amateur system and so on, but they don't match them against each other when they're still prospects. They'll wait until they're world champions. They both reach world level, and only then will they allow them to fight each other. I guess an example would be Devin Haney and Ryan Garcia, because they grew up fighting each other. No chance of them fighting as prospects, was there? No chance of them fighting as contenders. It's only when, let's see if Haney manages to beat Kambosos, but he's currently WBC champion. Ryan Garcia, correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't have a belt at the moment. Does he? Does Ryan Garcia have a belt? I don't think he has a belt. Anyway, I lose track sometimes. So, yeah, no prospect of them fighting each other. But it's funny because in America, they pick certain British prospects and they say, okay, he needs to fight our prospect. He needs to fight Jaron Ennis, right? Why don't Jaron Ennis fight any of the prospects or major contenders in America? I'm not against these fights, by the way. I'm not against certain British prospects and contenders fighting contenders from the United States. But again, it's just a question. How come they don't have these domestic fights in America where two top prospects or two top contenders are fighting each other? It seems very rare these days. Back in the days, of course, it was commonplace. But nowadays, you know, it is what it is. Anyway, enough of that. Jaron Ennis, my view on him is that he is extremely promising. If you were to compare him just with the eye test to Conor Benn, I would have to pick Jaron Ennis 10 times out of 10 over Conor Benn, just based on the eye test. But we have to see Jaron Ennis in there against some live opposition. And he has been trying to fight live opposition. He's calling out the livest of the live in Errol Spence and Terence Crawford, the top guys, Keith Thurman. So far, he's been unable to get any of these guys to fight him. And in fact, going back to the prospect versus prospect thing, sometimes it's easier to force one of the champions to fight you if you have got a win over another prospect. An example, again, Joe Joyce versus Daniel Dubois, which I mentioned previously. Yeah? Two guys seemingly destined for world level fighting each other before world level. Ennis, if he could do something like that, it might put him in a better position. In France, they just had Martin Bakole fight Tony Yoka. Bakole does have one loss, but Yoka was undefeated. These are two up-and-coming contenders, fought each other, and Bakole, according to his trainer, manager, God, I always forget the guy's name. I don't know why I forget his name. I've seen countless interviews with this guy. Billy Nelson, excuse me. I always forget his name. According to Billy Nelson, Martin Bakole is going to be at least in the top 6 once they release the new rankings for the sanctioning body. He's going to be at least in the top 6 because of that win over Tony Yoka. That did a lot more for him in terms of rankings than beating Sergey Kuzmin, for example. And I say beating in inverted commas because I don't think he won that fight. But either way, he officially got the decision. Kuzmin, a tough guy. Kuzmin put up a much better effort. He gave Bakole way more trouble than Tony Yoka did. The Yoka fight was a walk in the park for Bakole. But that fight, the walk in the park fight, because it was against a prospect, contender, whatever you want to refer to him as, because of that perception of Tony Yoka, it's going to do much more for Bakole's ranking. So that's what you can gain. That's how you can benefit. You can get to a mandatory position even with some of these prospect or contender versus contender fights. You can get into a mandatory position much more quickly, especially if you can build hype around it. Because if you can build hype around it, it draws the interest of the sanctioning bodies. Your promoter can lobby the sanctioning body to make it a final eliminator because there's so much money involved. The sanctioning body knows they're going to get a nice chunk of change. So they're like, okay, yeah, we'll sanction this as a final eliminator. This is how it works. And so this is something that in British boxing has been done very, very well. In American boxing, I don't know, you would alleviate a lot of the issues. You would remedy a lot of the problems in American boxing if you could just match talent against each other before they reach world level more often. And I'm talking about the real good talent that's destined for big things. Anyway, I'm going to end it there. That's my view on Jaron Ennis, a fantastic fighter. Based on the eye test, he looks like the truth. No disrespect to Errol Spence. He looks like a guy who's going places. He looks like a guy who'll be a problem for Crawford and Spence. But we need to see what he does when he's in there against elite level skills. When he's got an elite level fighter calculating the things that Ennis is doing in the ring, firing back at him. What's Ennis's chin like? What's his heart like? What's his stamina like when he's in a tough fight? He's 29-0, 27 KOs. Only 2 fights have been the distance. So stamina is definitely a question. And when you're dealing with these very athletically gifted guys, and you look at the fights that went the distance, they were 4-rounders, right? So we had a fight in 2016 that went a distance over 4 rounds, and another fight in 2016 which went a distance over 4. The only 2 times he's been a distance. Every other fight, he has stopped the guy or knocked him out. One of them was a no decision against Chris Van Heerden, but, well, that fight was going to end in a knockout anyway. So this is someone who is a serious puncher, a serious talent, but there's serious questions. Can he go the distance? Does he have the stamina? What happens when he's in deep waters? Can he figure it out? Does he have the heart? Does he have the chin? It's very interesting when you've got a guy this talented that hasn't really been many rounds in fights, and he's on the cusp of actually fighting one of the elite. That's what makes it so intriguing. So anyway, Ennis destroys Clayton, moves on, hopefully to bigger and better things. Let me know what you guys think about all the things I've talked about in this video. All right.